I've had a variety of different housing situations throughout my life, but currently I live alone. And so that's the topic of today's video, is we're going to be talking about what it's like to live alone, and whether it met up with my expectations, because living alone is something that I'd wanted to do for quite a while. So growing up for basically all of my life throughout, elementary school and middle and high school, I lived at home with my parents. It's a, big surprise there. I'm sure that most of you guys can relate to that. However, when I went off to university, which was immediately after finishing high school, I decided that I was going to start living in the dorms at my university. My home there, where I grew up, where my parents live, was a good hour and a half to 2 hours away from my school on transit, which, it's within the same city. It could have worked, but I would have just preferred to live on campus and really skip out on all that commuting time. So I did, and that was honestly pretty nice. So the situation for my first year of living was, it was kind of the classic dorm situation where everyone has their own bedroom. It was not shared. A lot of people did have a shared bedroom with one roommate, but I was lucky enough to get into one of the units that had just the single beds. So it was basically just a bedroom, a closet, and a desk in the room. Very classic dorm room setup. And then we were on a meal plan, so there was a cafeteria where you can go and swipe your card and just get the food that you want to eat whenever you want to do it, basically. I'm pretty sure there were meal times now that I think about it, so it wasn't exactly whenever you wanted to, but you kind of get my point there. We didn't have any cooking facilities of our own. The best we could do was like a fridge and a microwave in a common area in our building, which, honestly, I didn't really use all that much because, like I said, we already had that meal plan, so I figured, might as well just use the food that I've basically already paid for with the cost of my residence. And this situation was honestly pretty nice. It was a nice balance of both living alone, because I had my own separate bedroom where I could really just kind of like disconnect and do my own thing. But it was also communal enough that there were lots of people always hanging out in my building's floor lounge, and I made pretty good friends with a lot of my neighbors there. So a lot of those people ended up being basically the strongest friends that I ever got out of university. We all got pretty close in first year while we were there, and yeah, I really can't complain about it. It was a nice balance of having both that independence, for the first time ever, having truly my own space, and also still having a decent amount of forced socialization, essentially. Now, unfortunately, my first year of university started in 2019 and ended in 2020, and as I'm sure you probably remember, something happened in early of 2020, so I didn't get to live out my full year in that dorm. We moved out in March or so, and then everything went online for the next year and a half approximately. So I was living back at home with my parents. And honestly, after moving out, going back was pretty strange. Like the atmosphere was definitely a little different at home, I guess because there was no longer like continuous me living there since I was a child. There was a bit more I feel like there was a little bit more independence that I had and a little bit more freedom. I'm not sure if this was really a conscious decision on my end or my parents' end to make that change, but that's just kind of how it ended up working out. Not that there was really all that much to do with that freedom, given that it was the middle of 2020 and early 2021, but that was essentially my living situation for the next year or so, until around May of 2021, when university was looking like it was going back in person. I moved back to my university campus, but this time it wasn't into a classic dorm. It was into what I'll call my university apartment. And so this was a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. It was still funded through the university, so it was like discount student housing, which was great. It was much, much cheaper than the market value for rent at the time. And I honestly lucked out. Because of what happened in 2020, I ended up having a lot more time on the wait list for that accommodation than most people did. Normally they'd have to move straight in their second year, but because I had a full extra year to wait, I was able to get all the way to the front of the wait list and ended up getting first pick for basically all of my roommates and the location that we were at. So we ended up in it was the top floor of a 6-story building. It had an ocean view, which was sweet. And all the roommates that I had, so myself and those 3 other roommates, we all knew each other beforehand. One was one of my friends from high school, and the other 2 I'd met in first year, in that first year residence actually. So that was great. Getting to live with friends was amazing. And I know that if you live with people that aren't your friends already, things can be very different because you have to kind of sort out the vibe of the relationship being both a roommate and hopefully a friend as well. But when you start with a friendship to begin with, I find it's a lot easier to deal with the roommate things that come up over time afterwards. Now, speaking of those roommate things though, there were always some issues with that where like we would have to share things from time to time. We started out sharing almost everything. Like we would just go in on grocery orders and things like that. And, we'd obviously have our own snacks and some meals and stuff, but we did share quite a lot of meals too, which was nice, but it did break down pretty quickly once we all started settling into different schedules of classes and working and whatever. So once we started doing our own things, then we found it, at least I found it a little bit more difficult to share, just because there were 4 of us and we were all sharing one kitchen. Getting the time that you needed to do like a full meal prep, for example, on a Sunday was often pretty difficult. And so I found myself cooking pretty late into the night a lot of times. And I also saw my roommates doing that quite a bit, just because that was kind of the only times that we had whenever we would get to it. So we did butt heads over things like that a little bit. But honestly, the biggest plus from this living situation though was the fact that we were all friends already. And so every time you'd come home, if something weird would happen to you, you can just go knock on someone's door and you can go talk about it. It was pretty easy. Or, if at one point I went to the gym with a couple of these people quite a lot, so I would just knock on their door and be like, hey, ready to go right now? Like, let's just go do it. It's kind of whatever you'd imagine living with your friends was like. It was essentially exactly that whenever there were the good times. And plus, because we were all friends already, that ended up being a bit of a hangout spot for the rest of our broader friend group. So there would always be people over. We would be hosting parties and get-togethers and things like that. So overall, it was a really social space, despite still having my own bedroom that I could call my own and do whatever I wanted with. I got another taste of living in a different way when I entered my first fire season. So in the summer, I was working as a wildland firefighter, and my first year of doing that, I was living on my fire base, and it was in a pretty typical industrial work camp type setup where there's a shared kitchen, there's a cooking staff, and all the meals are provided, which was awesome for doing that. It was a great way to come home after a long day of working on a fire. But we essentially just had bedrooms. Again, it was like the university dorm setup where you have your own bedroom and it's shared bathrooms, shared showers, all this stuff. So it was a bit like going back to my first year university experience, but this time just with, adults rather than essentially fresh out of high school kids. So a little different, pretty similar there. And my second year in wildfire was actually completely different. Instead of living on a base, I lived just in someone's house. And I just found this person on, I think, Facebook Marketplace. They were looking to rent out a room in their house. And yeah, it was kind of a weird living setup because the landlord of the house lived in the living room. And then I lived in what I think was the master bedroom at one point. And there was another person working a different job, just living in, I guess, the guest or second bedroom. So it was kind of a lot of us, and having your landlord literally in the living room every single day was a little bit rough. So I was not too keen to replicate that in my third and final year in wildfire. So for my third year, I ended up getting what was basically like a little tiny home. I didn't purchase it, but I rented it. And it was just sitting in someone's backyard. And that was essentially my first time living in a fully self-contained, my own property. It was like a micro studio type thing where there was like a loft bed and a kitchen and a tiny little bathroom with a shower that was quite literally just barely big enough for me to fit. And I'm not even a very large guy, so I couldn't imagine being too much bigger and being comfortable in there. So it was pretty minimal. And just because of that, the day-to-day cleaning and everything was pretty easy, just because there just wasn't that much that could possibly get dirty. But it was my first taste of actually fully living on my own. Now, doing that in the fire season is different than normal life because often, a lot of the times, we'll be coming back super late after a long shift and we'll end up just eating fast food or something. So it wasn't the full normal life of living alone, but it was the first taste of that. After I finished with that, and once I was done university, I ended up moving into an apartment all by myself. So that's where I am now, is that I'm living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. And it's essentially it's finally the ideal living situation that I've been looking for so long that I wanted to try out. Because, one of the things that I was looking forward to the most about living alone when I was living in that university apartment was just the fact that if there's a mess, it's mine. Not having to deal with somebody else's mess is great. But the more that I've lived here alone, the more I realize that's a bit of a double-edged sword because sure, I don't have to worry about cleaning up after anyone else, but now I also just have this feeling of, well, I'm responsible for everything here, which, you are. And that's normal. But it was just a very different feeling where before it was very collaborative of okay, who's taking out the garbage this week? And, who's doing the vacuuming this week? We would always just try and separate those chores. And it was just a little easier that way versus now it's oh, who's doing the garbage run? Oh, me. Who's doing the recycling run? Well, that's me too, actually. Who's doing the vacuuming? That's me. It all lands on one person's shoulders, which, again, like I say, I'm not complaining about any of this. It's just different, and it's taking a little bit of getting used to, where I'll look around and be like, man, this place is not that clean. And then I won't really do anything about it because I'm still kind of used to that. Oh, well, I did it last week, so I clearly don't have to do it again this week type mentality from sharing. Another thing that's definitely a double-edged sword is the independence factor. So exactly how I had pictured it, having my own space, I am able to do what I want. But after seeing what it's like, I'm going to be honest, it's a little overrated. Like, it's nice being able to set up my life however I want it to, but the independence wouldn't be possible if I was living with anyone else. And one of the biggest pros of living with someone else is just that socialization factor. So, I mentioned this in another video because I'm working from home, I work for myself, and I live alone. I don't really have a lot of easy socialization opportunities with people, and especially with my friends as much. I still get out and see them as much as I can and as much as they're able to, but given that we don't live together anymore, it's just such a different vibe. And so, if I had to give a general takeaway, it would probably be this. Living with roommates, especially if they're your friends, is cheaper and it's more social, and so long as you have your own bedroom that you can close the door on and you don't have to actually share a bedroom, you still have your own space, I think that's probably the best living situation that you can have. If you're not single and you want to live with a partner, that's a bit of a different story. But I'm talking more so about just like, if you're a young guy, either just graduating university or high school, and you wanted to move out, what are the options of living with roommates or not? If the roommates are not people that you know, then that's going to be a very different factor again, and it's not something I have a ton of experience with other than that one fire season. But if you can, I would definitely try and live with friends. Like, that was a really great opportunity, and talking with them too, they also say the same thing about the experience. So I don't think it was just me that was enjoying it. I think it was them too. So yeah, I guess those are my thoughts on living alone after doing so for about 10 months. That 10 months includes the time that I spent in that tiny home during my last fire season, and then I rolled straight into living in this one-bedroom apartment back in the city. So yeah, if it's something that you can relate to, and if it's something that maybe you've been considering moving out and you weren't sure whether you wanted to go alone or go with roommates, let me know what you think about my experience in the comments. And if you have your own, please let me know that too. Alrighty, talk to you next time.